He rejected the Omega who loved him for years, until she married the Alpha King. The kingdom of Velaries lay shrouded in mist, a land of shadowed forests, towering castles, and whispers of old magic. Its mountains reached like frozen fingers into the clouds, and rivers of silver reflected the pale moonlight, making the nights feel alive with secrets. Among the many souls who walked these lands, none was so quietly devoted as Leora, a gentle and bright-eyed Omega who carried love in her heart that no one could see but herself. For years, she had watched Kalin, the young heir of the wolf court, from afar. Tall, strong, and yet sorrowful in his gaze, he moved through the halls of the royal palace like a shadow of both power and pain. Leora had admired him from her childhood, though she had never dared speak her true feelings. Every glance he cast, every word he uttered, lingered in her heart long after he had gone. She had dreamed of a day when he might look at her and see her not as a friend or a quiet companion, but as the one who belonged beside him. But that day never came. Kalin had always been distant, even to those who loved him most. The kingdom spoke of a prophecy that hung over him like a cloud, one that warned of darkness, betrayal, and sacrifice. Many believed Kalin feared love because it could make him weak, and perhaps he did. Or perhaps his heart was already weighed down by burdens Leora could not even imagine. One cool evening, when the autumn wind rustled the golden leaves of the palace gardens, Leora finally gathered her courage. She had prepared her words for months, shaping them in her mind like a fragile crystal. She approached Kalin as he stood alone, gazing at the moonlit pond, where the reflection of the stars shimmered on the water. "Kalin," she said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was a pause, as if the world itself held its breath. I have something I must tell you," Leora continued, her hands trembling. "I have loved you for a long time. I have always loved you." Kalin's expression darkened, a shadow passing across his handsome face. He took a step back as if her words had burned him. "Leora," he said, his voice low, almost sorrowful, "you know I cannot. I cannot love in the way you hope." The words struck her like ice. Her chest tightened and the world seemed to tilt. She had expected rejection, feared it even, but hearing it spoken aloud made her knees feel weak. "But why? Have I not been faithful? Have I not cared for you?" Kalin shook his head, looking away, his fingers brushing against the cold stone railing. "It is not your fault. You are kind, brave, and beautiful, but I am bound to something I cannot escape. To love me is to walk into darkness you do not deserve." Leora's tears burned, but she refused to let them fall. She wanted to shout, to demand that he explain, but the fear of losing him entirely kept her silent. "Then, what am I to do?" she whispered. "You must live," he replied, "and you must find someone worthy of your heart. Someone who can give you the light I cannot." With that, he turned and walked away, his cloak swirling around him like shadow. Leora stood frozen, the cold wind cutting through her, the garden around her seeming suddenly vast and empty. Her heart felt hollow, but somewhere deep inside, a small spark of resolve remained. If Kalin could not see her worth, she would find it herself. Days passed in a blur of quiet sorrow. Leora wandered through the forest near her home, letting the mist wrap around her like a gentle cloak. She visited the old willow tree by the river, a place where she had often dreamt of happiness, and for the first time she allowed herself to weep. The wind carried her sorrow through the trees, and even the owls seemed to watch her with solemn eyes. It was during one such walk that she first heard of him, the Alpha King, Darius. Stories of Darius filled the villages and cities alike. He was a ruler of unmatched power, feared for his strength and cunning, yet also spoken of with awe for his wisdom. He had conquered enemies, lifted curses, and commanded a kingdom that seemed almost alive with magic. And yet he was also a man haunted by loss, whose heart had been scarred by betrayal and sorrow. At first, the thought of Darius filled Leora with fear. She had grown up dreaming only of Kalin. but there was something in the tales that stirred her curiosity, a sense that perhaps life had more to offer than unrequited love and silent suffering. Then, one crisp morning, the news arrived like a bolt of lightning. A royal emissary, clad in black and silver, arrived at her home. His eyes were cold but respectful as he bowed before her. "Leora of the Silver Woods," he announced in a voice that carried authority, "the Alpha King, Darius of Velaries, requests your presence at his court. By royal decree, you are to become his bride." The words hung in the air like a curse. Leora felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her heart raced, confusion and disbelief warring with a strange flicker of anticipation. I am to marry the Alpha King," she asked, her voice barely steady. The emissary nodded. "It is the king's will. Prepare yourself, for you depart at dawn." That night Leora could not sleep. She sat by the window of her chamber, the moonlight spilling across her face, and thought of Kalin. She remembered his rejection, the pain of those words, and yet she also felt a strange pull toward the unknown life awaiting her. Darius, he was a man she had never met, a king of shadows and power. The thought of him stirred fear and curiosity in equal measure. By morning, Leora was dressed in a simple gown, her hair braided with silver threads. She felt as though she were leaving behind the life she had always known, the soft familiarity of unrequited love, the quiet streets of her village, and even the memory of Kalin's gaze. With each step toward the carriage that awaited her, she felt a mixture of dread and wonder. The journey to Darius's castle was long and silent. The carriage moved through forests that seemed to whisper secrets, past rivers that shimmered like molten silver, and over mountains where the wind sang mournful songs. Leora's mind raced with questions. What kind of man was Darius? Would he be cruel or kind? Would he see her as a tool of politics, or could there be something deeper between them? When the castle finally came into view, Leora's breath caught. It was massive, its towers reaching like dark fingers into the sky, its walls black as night. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating carved dragons and wolves that guarded the gates. The air was thick with magic, old and powerful, and Leora felt her heart tremble. She stepped out of the carriage, her feet on the cold stone path leading to the great doors. A hush fell over the courtyard, the servants and guards watching silently as she approached. And then, there he was, Darius. He stood tall, his armor dark and gleaming, his cloak sweeping the ground. His hair was like a shadow in the moonlight, his eyes sharp as flint. For a moment he said nothing, simply observing her with a quiet intensity that made Leora's pulse quicken. She felt exposed under his gaze, yet strangely seen in a way she had never felt before, not by Kalin, not by anyone. "Leora," Darius said finally, his voice low and commanding, yet not unkind. "You have come. I trust your journey was uneventful." She bowed her head, trying to steady her racing heart. "It was as expected, Your Majesty." Darius studied her, his eyes lingering on her face as if he were trying to read her very soul. "Good," he said at last. "You will find that life at court is demanding. But I believe you are strong enough to endure it." Leora nodded, though a flicker of uncertainty ran through her. She knew she must be strong, not only for herself, but for whatever future awaited her in this castle of shadows. She did not yet understand the depths of power, danger, or destiny she was about to face, but she felt the stirrings of something in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and the faintest hint of hope. That night, as the moon rose high over the castle, Leora stood at the window of her new chamber. She could hear the wind howling through the towers, carrying with it the whispers of the past, the promises of the future, and the weight of choices she had yet to make. She thought of Kalin, of the life she had left behind, and of the man who now awaited her, Darius, the Alpha King, whose heart was as guarded as the walls of his castle. And somewhere deep in her chest, a spark of courage took hold. She would survive this new life. She would face the unknown, and perhaps she would even find a love stronger than the one she had always dreamed of. But fate, as always, had its own designs. And in the shadows of the castle, unseen and waiting, something stirred. Ancient magic, old curses, and the echoes of a past that would not let her go so easily. The castle of Darius, the Alpha King, loomed like a shadow over the valley, its towers piercing the clouds. The halls were wide and cold, echoing with footsteps that seemed to carry centuries of secrets. Leora had never seen anything so magnificent or so intimidating. Every corner was adorned with carvings of ancient beasts, wolves, dragons, and creatures she had only heard of in whispered stories. Yet, despite the grandeur, there was a feeling of loneliness that hung in the air, as if the castle itself were alive with memories of sorrow. Leora was led through the corridors by a silent servant, her hands gripping the folds of her gown. Every step felt heavy with expectation. She was about to enter a world she had never known, a world of power, of secrets, and of a man whose reputation alone could make the bravest tremble. Finally, she was brought to a chamber at the center of the castle. It was vast, with high ceilings and windows that overlooked the misty valley below. Darius stood near the hearth, his cloak draped across his broad shoulders. His eyes, sharp and dark as storm clouds, studied her carefully. "You have arrived," he said simply, his voice steady but not unkind. "You will live here within these walls. You will learn the ways of the court and your duties as the Alpha King's bride." Leora bowed, though her heart raced like a wild stallion. "Yes, your majesty." Her voice was quiet, yet there was an undercurrent of courage she could not hide. Darius regarded her for a long moment. "I will not lie to you," he said. "Life here is not easy. Those who walk these halls are not all allies, and the shadows of the past linger in every corner. You must be careful whom you trust." She nodded, feeling a shiver of both fear and anticipation. Somehow, beneath the coldness in his words, she sensed a layer of care, a quiet protection he offered without admitting it. Days at the castle were unlike anything Leora had known. The mornings were filled with lessons about the lands, the people, and the history of Velaries. She learned to read ancient scrolls, understand court protocols, and recognize the subtle gestures that could mean loyalty or betrayal. The afternoons were spent walking through the gardens, which were both beautiful and wild. Statues of past kings and queens stared silently, their eyes seeming to follow her movements. The wind carried the faint scent of jasmine and pine, and the birds' cries echoed like music through the halls. Darius observed her quietly during these days. He watched her hands as she studied the texts, the way her eyes lit up when she discovered a new fact, and even the small, subtle movements that revealed her courage and intelligence. He was a man of power, of shadows and storms, yet in Leora he saw something that intrigued him, something untamed and true. Yet, despite her growing fascination with him, Leora's thoughts often drifted to Kalin. She remembered his rejection, the way his words had cut her heart, and though she tried to push him from her mind, she could not. The pain of what had been, mixed with the uncertainty of what was to come, made her feel fragile in a way she had never imagined. One evening, the castle was quiet, the corridors dimly lit by torches that flickered like dancing spirits. Leora wandered into the central hall, drawn by a strange feeling she could not name. The room was filled with shadows, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure move among them. "Leora," Darius's voice called from the staircase above. "Do not wander alone. These halls can be dangerous to those unfamiliar with their secrets." She turned, startled, and saw him descending slowly, his eyes calm but alert. There was a strength in his presence that made her heart skip a beat. I wanted to see the hall," she said softly. "It is beautiful, though a little frightening." Darius nodded. "Yes. The castle is full of stories. Some of them are not kind, some are even cruel. But you, Leora, will learn to walk through these halls without fear." Her gaze met his, and in that moment a connection sparked, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. She felt both seen and challenged, as if he were testing not just her courage, but her very spirit. Days turned into weeks, and Leora began to understand the rhythms of life at the court. She learned which nobles were trustworthy, which whispered secrets only to betray them later, and which servants carried knowledge that could change the fate of kings. It was a dangerous dance of power, and she had to learn quickly if she was to survive. Through it all, Darius remained a constant presence. Sometimes he would speak to her about the history of the kingdom, telling stories of kings and queens whose choices had shaped the land. Other times, he would simply walk beside her in the gardens, neither speaking nor needing to, their silence speaking volumes. Leora found herself drawn to him in ways she had never imagined. She could see the pain beneath his calm exterior, the burden of leadership, and the loneliness that came with being unmatched in power. Yet, despite the growing bond, there was a barrier between them. Darius did not openly express affection, and Leora, still carrying the wounds of Kalin's rejection, did not yet trust her own heart. The castle was a place of beauty and danger, of light and shadow, and she had to learn to navigate both. One day, as Leora explored a hidden corridor, she discovered a door that seemed older than the castle itself. It was carved with intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the torchlight. Curiosity overcame caution, and she pushed the door open. Inside, the room was small but filled with ancient scrolls, paintings, and artifacts. The walls were lined with portraits of men and women who had once ruled the land, their eyes seeming to follow her movements. In the center of the room lay a chest, bound with iron and covered in dust. Leora hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were letters, trinkets, and a delicate necklace. As she touched the items, a memory stirred in her mind, a story Darius had never told, a past that had shaped the man she was beginning to know. Footsteps approached, and Leora quickly closed the chest. Darius stood in the doorway, his eyes steady on her. "You have found the Hall of Memories," he said. "Few are allowed here. It contains pieces of my life that I have not shared with anyone." Leora bowed her head, suddenly aware of the trust he had placed in her by leaving the room open. I did not mean to intrude," she said softly. Darius stepped closer, his gaze gentle but firm. "Sometimes those who are meant to be here find their way without being told. You have courage, Leora. That is why I allow you to see even the shadows of my past." For the first time, Leora felt that she understood him. Not fully, but enough to know that beneath the strength and power, there was a man who had loved and lost, who had fought battles both outside and within his own heart. She felt a spark of connection, a fragile thread that linked their souls across the space between them. The days that followed were filled with both challenge and wonder. Leora continued to learn the ways of the court, gaining confidence with each passing hour. She discovered that her own courage and intelligence could rival those of the most skilled nobles, and that even in the face of fear, she could stand firm. And yet, even as her admiration for Darius grew, she could not forget Kalin. His name lingered in her thoughts like a shadow she could not shake. She wondered if she had made the right choice, if the life she now lived would bring her joy or heartbreak. One evening, Darius called her to the highest tower of the castle. The wind howled around them, carrying the scent of rain and pine. The valley below was cloaked in mist, and the moonlight shimmered like silver on the mountains. "Leora," Darius said, his voice low and steady, "I have watched you grow stronger each day. You have faced the challenges of the court with courage, and you have learned to see through the shadows. But there is more to learn, more than even I can teach you." She looked at him, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. "What do you mean, Your Majesty?" He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "There are forces in this kingdom older than either of us, forces that do not forgive and that do not forget. You must be prepared for them, for they will test you in ways you cannot imagine. And in those trials you may find truths about yourself and about me that you are not yet ready to face." Leora swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she felt the weight of his words and the truth in them. There was a danger here, yes, but also a possibility, a chance to become more than she had ever imagined. As the wind whipped around the tower, carrying the whispers of the mountains, Leora knew that her life had changed forever. She had entered a world of power, of shadows, and of the heart. She had faced the court, the lessons, and the quiet strength of the Alpha King. And she had survived. The first snow of winter fell over Velaries, covering the mountains and forests in a soft, cold blanket. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and frost. Leora stood by the window of her chamber in the Alpha King's castle, watching the snow swirl across the valley. Though the castle was warm and grand, her heart carried a chill she could not shake. The past had a way of returning, and in her thoughts, Kalin's face appeared like a shadow she could not banish. For weeks, she had been learning the ways of the court, growing stronger and more confident. She understood the nuances of power and intrigue, and she felt a quiet connection with Darius. Yet, even as she began to trust him, a part of her still lingered in the memories of rejection, the pain of unspoken words, and the life she had imagined with Kalin. It was on a morning that began like any other that the castle's tranquility shattered. A messenger arrived from the wolf court, clad in furs and bearing a seal Leora knew instantly. Kalin had returned to Velaries. The news struck her heart with a mixture of dread and uncertainty. She had imagined never seeing him again, that the memory of his rejection would fade in the shadow of Darius's court. But now he was here, and the past she had tried to leave behind stirred like a storm ready to break. Kalin entered the castle accompanied by his guards, his eyes scanning the great hall as if searching for something or someone. When their gazes finally met, Leora felt the world tilt. His expression was unreadable, a mix of longing, regret, and something darker she could not name. "Leora," Kalin said softly, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. "I did not expect, I did not think." "You have arrived," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She held her head high, refusing to let her emotions betray her. "Velaries welcomes you, Prince Kalin, but I am no longer the same girl you knew." Kalin's eyes flickered with both pain and realization. "I see that," he said quietly. "I see how much I have missed." Before Leora could respond, Darius stepped forward from the shadows of the hall. His presence was commanding, yet calm, like a storm held at bay. His eyes, dark and intense, rested on Kalin. "You are far from home," Darius said, his voice even, though the undercurrent of authority was unmistakable. "Tell me, Prince, what brings you to my kingdom?" Kalin straightened, meeting Darius's gaze without fear. "I came because I could not stay away." I have come for her," he admitted, his voice carrying both vulnerability and urgency. The hall fell silent. Leora's heart pounded, a mix of fear, anger, and a strange, painful nostalgia. She had thought she had left the past behind. She had chosen to step into a new life, into a bond that was growing stronger each day. And now, Kalin had returned, threatening to unravel everything. Darius's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained steady. "She belongs to Velaries now, and she belongs to me." Kalin did not step back. Instead, he took a careful, deliberate step forward. "I do not care for titles or kingdoms, I care for her. Leora, I—" "Stop!" Leora's voice rang out, sharp and clear. She could not let this confrontation continue. She could not allow the past to destroy what she was beginning to understand about herself and about Darius. "Kalin, you cannot claim me. You turned me away once and now you return expecting, what? That I will forget the pain you caused." Kalin's face fell, the mask of certainty cracking to reveal the remorse he had tried to hide. I was wrong," he whispered. "I see that now. Leora's hands clenched at her sides. She realized that this was not just about Kalin. It was about her strength, her choices, and the life she was determined to live. She had learned courage in the halls of the Alpha King's castle, and she would not allow her heart to be pulled apart again. Darius stepped closer to her, his presence steady and grounding. "Leora," he said quietly, "do not doubt yourself. You have chosen your path. Do not let him drag you into shadows you have already escaped." Kalin's gaze softened, and for a brief moment it seemed as if the past could return, but Leora's heart was firm. She had grown in these walls, had learned to stand strong in the face of fear, and had begun to understand the bond forming between herself and Darius, a bond built not on power alone, but on respect, trust, and the slow warmth of connection. The tension in the hall was thick. Nobles and guards watched silently, sensing the storm between the three of them. Outside, the wind howled against the castle walls, carrying the scent of frost and pine. For days, the presence of Kalin in Velaries made every moment tense. Leora tried to avoid him, but he found ways to cross her path, his eyes always seeking hers. Each encounter stirred old emotions she thought she had buried, longing, sorrow, and a faint hope that perhaps the love she had once dreamed of could still be reclaimed. Yet with every step closer, Kalin also revealed a side of himself that frightened her. He had changed, grown in strength and determination, but also in pride and stubbornness. The same man who had once rejected her now demanded her attention, and it was a test she was not sure she could pass. Darius, ever watchful, did not confront Kalin directly, but his presence was a constant reminder that Leora was not alone. He guided her, spoke to her, and allowed her the space to understand her own heart. In his quiet way, he showed her that love was not only about longing, it was about choice, trust, and courage. One evening, as snow fell silently outside the castle, Leora found herself walking alone in the moonlit gardens. She needed to think, to breathe, to understand the storm inside her. The snow glistened on the branches, and the silence was almost sacred, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the frozen ground. Suddenly, Kalin appeared at the edge of the garden, his dark coat blending with the shadows. "Leora," he said, his voice low, almost desperate. "Please do not shut me out. I have learned too late what I lost." She stopped, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Kalin," she said softly, "you cannot undo the past. You rejected me once, and that choice changed everything. I cannot let it control me again." He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I know, but I want to try. I want to fight for you if you will let me." Leora's heart ached. She remembered the pain of rejection, the nights she had cried alone, and the courage it had taken to walk into Darius's world. Yet she also felt the pull of old love, a ghost that lingered despite time and distance. She could not ignore it, but she could not surrender to it either. From the shadows, Darius emerged quietly. He had followed her, as he often did, not to intimidate but to watch, to ensure she was safe. His presence was strong and unwavering, and for a moment Leora felt the choice in her hands, not the demands of others but her own heart. Kalin looked at Darius and then at Leora, and for the first time he seemed uncertain. The power in Darius's presence was undeniable, but he could see the bond that had grown between them. Leora, standing tall between the two men, realized the truth of her own feelings. I cannot choose," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Not yet. My heart, my life, it belongs to no one but me. You must understand that. I will not be torn between what was and what is." Kalin's face fell, the realization of loss settling over him. He stepped back, bowing his head slightly. "I see," he said quietly. "Then I will leave you to your choice, though it pains me more than I can say." Darius moved closer to Leora, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You have done well," he said softly. "You have faced fear, longing, and the ghosts of the past. That is courage." The snow continued to fall, the garden bathed in silver light. Leora felt the weight of the storm she had endured and the quiet strength that had carried her through. She did not yet know what the future held, but for the first time she understood that her life and her heart were hers to command. Winter deepened in Velaries, and the kingdom lay beneath a thick blanket of snow. The mountains and forests were silent except for the occasional cry of a hawk or the whisper of the wind through the trees. But the calm was deceptive. Shadows were stirring in the valleys, and old magic, long forgotten, had begun to awaken. Leora could feel it even from within the stone walls of the Alpha King's castle. For weeks, she had balanced the tension between the past and the present. Kalin's return had forced her to confront her old emotions, and Darius had guided her through them with patience and strength. Now, however, there was no time to linger in thought. A storm of danger approached, and Velaries itself seemed to hold its breath. It began with a tremor in the castle. One evening, while Leora was studying the ancient texts in the Hall of Memories, the torches flickered and dimmed. A cold wind, unnatural and biting, swept through the halls. Leora shivered, sensing a presence beyond the walls, something dark, powerful, and hungry. Darius appeared silently behind her, his eyes scanning the shadows. "It has begun," he said, his voice low but steady. "The curse that has haunted this kingdom for generations is waking. It senses fear, doubt, and sorrow, and it will feed on them." Leora's heart pounded. She had heard stories of curses in Velaries, spirits of angered kings, ancient magic bound by vengeance, and shadows that could consume even the bravest soul. She looked up at Darius. "What must we do?" "We face it," he said simply, "together, but it will not be easy. It will test your courage, your heart, and your trust in those you love." Just as he spoke, the doors of the Hall of Memories slammed open. Kalin stood there, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "It's coming," he warned. "I felt it outside, something alive moving through the snow toward the castle." Leora took a deep breath. The past and the present were colliding. Kalin, with all his longing and regret, had returned to warn her. Darius, steady and commanding, had prepared her for what was coming, and she, Leora, had to be ready. The three of them gathered in the central courtyard as darkness fell. The wind howled, carrying a cold that seemed unnatural, and the first signs of the curse appeared. Shadows twisted and moved along the snow, forming shapes that were both human and beast. They circled the castle walls like wolves hungry for prey. Darius raised his hand, and the runes carved into the castle stones glowed with a silver light. "Hold fast," he commanded. This is not the time for fear. Leora felt her heart race. She had trained, learned, and grown stronger, but nothing could prepare her for the living shadow before her. She clutched her cloak and looked at both men. Kalin's fear was clear, but he had not fled. Darius's presence was steady, anchoring her, reminding her of the strength they shared. The shadows advanced, and Darius led them in a circle around the courtyard, chanting words older than Velaries itself. The snow around their feet glowed faintly, a barrier forming between them and the dark magic. Leora realized she had a role to play, not just as an observer, but as someone whose courage could tip the balance. She closed her eyes and focused on the warmth she felt for Darius, the trust they had built, and the life she was beginning to understand. She whispered words she did not fully understand, but somehow the castle seemed to respond. Light spread from the stones into her hands, and she felt the shadows shrink back, writhing and twisting as if the very walls themselves had begun to fight. Kalin, watching her, took a step forward. "You have power," he said softly. I never realized it before." "You must not falter," Darius said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your heart, your courage, your choice, these are stronger than any darkness." The shadows surged once more, moving faster, sharper, and more vicious than before. Leora felt a wave of fear, but she did not let it control her. She remembered every lesson, every step that had brought her here, the rejection by Kalin, the growth in the Alpha King's court, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. Drawing on that inner fire, she raised her hands, sending a pulse of light into the night. The shadows screamed, recoiling, writhing, then finally shattering into fragments that melted into the snow. The wind calmed, and for a moment silence fell over the courtyard. Kalin and Darius looked at her in awe. The power that had lain dormant within her had awakened at the moment it was most needed. She realized then that her strength was not just hers. It was the result of every choice she had made, every trial she had faced, and every bond she had formed. But even as relief settled over them, a new danger emerged. From the center of the courtyard, a dark figure rose, taller and more terrifying than the shadows before. Its form was cloaked in swirling black, eyes glowing with ancient anger. The curse had taken shape. "You have done well to survive the first trial," the figure hissed, its voice like wind through ice. "But you cannot escape what is coming. The hearts you cling to will falter, the bonds you trust will be broken, and only one truth remains: none can escape destiny." Darius stepped forward, placing himself between Leora and the figure. "You will not touch her," he said. "Not while I stand." Kalin moved beside them, forming a triangle of strength. "We may be few, but we are not powerless," he said. "Together we face this." The battle that followed was unlike anything Leora had imagined. Shadows clashed with silver light, magic and courage weaving together in a dance of fury and strength. She felt the fear in her chest, but she did not allow it to rule her. Every step, every breath, every choice became a weapon against the darkness. Darius and Kalin fought alongside her, their presence steady and unwavering. She saw the bond between them, not romantic, but powerful in a way that gave her hope. Kalin's regret softened into determination. Darius's strength became a guide, and Leora's courage became the spark that ignited the light that could push back centuries of darkness. As dawn broke over Velaries, painting the snow in shades of gold and silver, the curse finally faltered. The dark figure shrieked, dissolving into mist, and the shadows scattered, retreating into the forests and mountains from which they had come. The castle was quiet, the air still, and the first rays of sunlight reflected off the snow like a promise of renewal. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Darius knelt beside her, offering a hand. "You were remarkable," he said softly. "Velaries owes its life to your courage." Kalin stepped forward, his face solemn but softened by awe. I underestimated you," he admitted. "You are more than I ever realized." Leora looked at both men, her heart filled with relief, pride, and understanding. She had faced rejection, fear, and darkness. She had discovered her own strength, and in doing so had chosen her path, not for love, not for duty, but for herself. She rose, meeting Darius's gaze. "I know now that my heart cannot be claimed by the past," she said. "I have learned courage, strength, and trust, and I choose what I know is right for me." Darius's hand found hers, and in that simple touch there was a promise of partnership, respect, and a bond stronger than fear or shadows. Kalin bowed his head, understanding at last that love cannot be forced, nor can it reclaim what is no longer offered. The snow fell gently around them, softening the scars of the battle, and the sun rose higher, casting light over Velaries for the first time in what felt like centuries. The castle itself seemed to breathe, the echoes of old magic fading, leaving behind a kingdom ready to heal. Leora felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing that while challenges would come, she had the courage and the allies to face them. And as she looked at Darius, standing tall and steady beside her, she understood the truth of her journey. Love is not simply longing, nor is it power alone. It is courage, trust, and the choice to face the unknown together.